Welcome to another Rusty Rails rail fanning adventure. On today's rail fanning adventure, we revisit the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum in Chattanooga, Tennessee. The date is August 8th, 2020. As we got to the museum, the train hadn't arrived at Grand Junction yet. But not long, we heard a steam locomotive's whistle in the distance. Pulling the train that day was Southern Railway number 4501, built in 1911. The train had come to a stop at Grand Junction. 4501 was uncoupled from the train and ran the Y.
Late.
Southern 4501 came to a stop at the end of a track and started its reverse move back to the parking lot. Right as Norfolk Southern train rolled on past. We quickly got to the first car of the train and watched 4501 couple up to the train. After the air hoses were connected, Southern 4501's air pump went to work building up the brake pipe pressure. Before the first trip left, we walked past the yard at Grand Junction, and when we got set up, 4501's whistle blew twice, and she was on the move. We are now located at Grand Junction Station, as 4501 returned from the first trip. We are now set up on the hillside by the Y, as 4501 backs her way around the Y. As 4501 made her way back to her train, we decided to take a walk around the display yard at the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. In the background, you can hear 4501 idling away. After walking the display yard, we decided to set up right next to it, as 4501 began the second journey of the day. Before 4501 was given the clear, we placed one of our GoPros on one of the cross ties. Here's another shot of 4501 from one of our GoPros, but this time as she pulls into Grand Junction. We quickly ran up to the road crossing of the parking lot and caught the 01 running the wall. When we got to the museum, we bought a ticket to ride the train. So sit back, relax, and enjoy a ride on the Missionary Ridge Local behind Southern Railway 4501.
Your flagman is Andrew, your engineer is Brian, and your fireman is Joseph. Now, before we depart, I am required to mention, by order of the Hamilton County Health Department, all passengers are required to wear a mask for the duration of the trip, and please stay seated in the seats assigned to you by the train crew for the duration of the trip as well. Now, for those of you who have not ridden with us before, what this trip is, it will be approximately 1 hour long. It will include 15 to 20 minutes of travel in each direction on the 3 miles of track donated by the Southern Railway, and a 20 to 30 minute layover in East Chattanooga, where we will have a demonstration of our antique turntable. And we should be departing shortly. Everyone go ahead and have a good look at Grand Junction here as we depart, because we'll be returning in a day or two, a week at the most. Now, just to go ahead and tell you about the cars you're going to be riding in today for this trip. For those of you riding in the red car, those of you with that red wristband, you are riding in the 661, built in 1947 by the American Car and Foundry, or ACF, for the Central of Georgia Railroad, used on a passenger train named the Nancy Hanks II, which ran between Atlanta and Savannah, Georgia. And for those of you with the green wristband and the green coach, you're riding in the 906, built in 1924 by the Pullman Company for the Central of Georgia Railroad. Now, you're riding on one of the first railroads into Chattanooga today. This line was completed in 1859 by the East Tennessee and Georgia Railroad. The ET&G would merge with a number of other railroads over time to become the famous Southern Railway in 1894. Now, the Southern would continue to use this 3-mile section of track until they abandoned it in the 1950s for reasons I'll explain later in our journey. They built a new line to the north, which was the main freight line you saw behind Grand Junction Station. And that line is still used today by the Southern Railway successor, the Norfolk Southern Corporation. And of course, after the Southern Railway did abandon this line, eventually they would donate the 3 miles to us here at the museum. If you have a look to the left of the train, you will see a gravel road. Now, that gravel road is the roadbed for the original 1859 right-of-way. The line was elevated to its current height and position in the first decade of the 20th century by the Southern Railway due to numerous occasions of flooding. Of course, Chattanooga used to be extremely prone to flooding before the construction of the Chickamauga Dam during the Great Depression. As an example of this flooding on the left, in a moment, in a clearing in the trees, you will see a sign. Next to that sign is a tree with a yellow line painted on it. That yellow line represents the high water mark from the Great Flood of 1867. At 9 feet above the track, it explains why this line had to be elevated. We're now crossing our first bridge over South Chickamauga Creek. In the water below, you may spot some turtles, river otters, or geese. Now, just to the left is some stone piers. Those stone piers mark the site of the original bridge. On top of those stone piers would have been a wooden decking that the rails would have run on. Now, the original bridge at that location was made entirely of stone and was washed away in a flood in 1861. Unfortunately, an engineer did not see that that bridge had washed away in time, and, well, let's just say he and his train went for a swim. For fun. Second bridge over the Western and Atlantic Railroad. You'll be able to see it from both sides of the train. That is the first line into Chattanooga, being completed by the state of Georgia in 1850. It was was built by the state of Georgia and is still owned by the state of Georgia today, running from Atlanta to Chattanooga. It is currently leased out to CSX. Now, that line is also home to a very famous story from the Civil War. Some of you may have heard of it, and that would be the Great Locomotive Chase. Now, for those of you who have not heard of it, the Great Locomotive Chase is the story of Union spy James Andrews and 23 others known as the Andrews Raiders. They disguised themselves as civilians and made their way to Big Shanty, Georgia, which is today Kennesaw, Georgia, and stole a locomotive named General while it was on a fuel, water, and mill stop. They planned to race the General all the way north to Chattanooga while burning bridges and destroying track and telegraph wires along the way in an effort to sever the crucial Confederate supply artery. They were pursued by the General's conductor, William Fuller, and a locomotive he commandeered named the Texas. Now, the Texas was facing south, so for the duration of that chase, he had to run the locomotive in reverse. The General ran out of fuel just north of Ringgold, Georgia, about 18 miles down the track in Chattanooga. All of the men were caught. 8 of them, including Andrews himself, were hung in Atlanta. They are today buried at the Chattanooga National Cemetery around a bronze replica of the General, just a few miles from our current location. The rest of the men either escaped prison or were exchanged for Confederate prisoners. The Andrews Raiders were the very first to ever receive the Medal of Honor, but Andrews himself did not, as he was a civilian and not eligible. If you'd like to know more on that topic, there are many books and films based on that event, including Buster Keaton's silent film The General, and one of Walt Disney's lesser-known films in the 1950s, also titled The Great Locomotive Chase. Now, both locomotives involved in that chase are still preserved today. The Texas is on display at the Atlanta History Center in Atlanta, Georgia, and the General is on display at the Southern Museum of Civil War and Locomotive History in Kennesaw, Georgia. Now, for those of you riding in the green car, or the 906 where I'm speaking from, I'd like to point out that midway through this car, you may have noticed that there is a wall separating the two halves of the coach. That is because when this coach was built, it was known as a Jim Crow car, used during the era of segregation. When the Interstate Commerce Commission desegregated the railroads in 1955, most cars of this type had those walls removed. For some reason, here this wall was kept intact. We're not really sure why. Now, when we acquired the coach, we made the decision to preserve that wall in its original condition as a reminder of a very important time in our nation's past. Because as the saying goes, if you don't remember your past, you're doomed to repeat it. Now, this coach is believed to be the only coach in operation in the world today with that wall still preserved. Now, we just crossed our third bridge over Tunnel Boulevard. Originally, that road would have tunneled underneath the railroad hence its name. When the Southern Railway abandoned this line in the 1950s, the roof of that tunnel was opened up to avoid maintenance costs. After the land was donated to us, we put a bridge over that gap. So today we have Tunnel Boulevard without a tunnel. It is also the only place we can legally run over cars. Now, if you have a look to the right of the train, I'll point out some of my favorite trees along the route. There's this one, and this one, and this one here with the leaves on it. I call that one Chris. Chris time.
What's up, Chris?
We're now making our climb up Missionary Ridge, but rather than travel over it, we're going to travel through it. Through the Missionary Ridge Tunnel, also known as the White Slate Tunnel. This tunnel is 986 feet long, about the length of 3 football fields. It was completed in 1858, dedicated in 1859, and was excavated entirely by pick and shovel, as dynamite was not invented until 1867, so I guess you could say it went off without a bang. Now, this tunnel was excavated from both ends of the ridge, meeting in the middle. When both portals did meet in the middle, they were only off-center from each other by 3 inches. During World War II, this tunnel would see as many as 70 trains a day. Now, this tunnel is the reason that this line was eventually abandoned. After World War II, the railway's equipment was becoming too large to fit through the pre-Civil War era tunnel. Also, at the time, the tunnel was single-tracked while the rest of the line was double-tracked, creating a major bottleneck. So that new line was built in the north and bypasses the ridge altogether. Now, a few seconds ago, you may have heard the whistle of our locomotive signaling our approach to the tunnel, meaning we will be entering the tunnel at any moment, so I hope no one on board is scared of the dark. Now, if you happen to have a flashlight app on your cell phone, I do encourage you to get those out, shine them out the windows, and illuminate the tunnel walls as we pass through. While in the tunnel, you may notice we are very close to the tunnel walls, and at times there is indeed less than 10 inches of clearance between us and these walls. It's a good thing we don't have any open windows on this train. Mary Ridge, you can imagine traveling on a Southern Railway passenger train in the early 20th century, as this is how you would have approached downtown Chattanooga. Right for that tunnel there, with your final destination being Terminal Station, which has today been converted into the Chattanooga Choo Choo Hotel. Now, of course, passenger trains back then would have consisted of more than just passenger coaches. For example, there might have been a baggage car, an RPO car, sleeping car, lounge car, on some trains even a dome car or an observation car. Then on most trains was my favorite, the dining car. Speaking of dining car, who knows how a steam locomotive eats? It choo-choo-choos. Now, we have almost reached the end of the 3 miles of track donated by the Southern Railway, so in about 5 more minutes we'll be coming to a stop at our East Chattanooga depot. Once there, you do have the option of either staying on board the train for the layover, or joining me as we do a demonstration of our turntable at... Now, I do recommend everyone does join me for this demonstration, because this is one of the only places in the world where you can see what's about to take place. Now, also available is the East Chattanooga depot. There are restrooms inside if you happen to need to use those while we are at East Chattanooga. We will be unloading the train by car color to ensure social distancing, so please remain seated once the train is coming to a stop until your car color is called. Once you have exited the train, take a left down the stairway or the ramp, and then just follow that pathway on down to the turntable. Now, once we have everyone gathered around the turntable, we will begin the demonstration. Now, also by order of the Hamilton County Health Department, we are required to ask that all passengers do keep a 6 foot distance from those parties around you while at the turntable, and also keep your mask on there as well. And we also have to ask that once you return to the train, you do return to the same car and seat you were in at this time. So please take note of your car color. It is the color of your wristband. And then if you look above your windows, you will see your seat numbers. The A is for aisle, the W is for window. So we do have to ask that you return to those same seats. Now to the right of the train, you'll see a section of track running downhill next to these trees. That is the East Chattanooga Belt Line. It extends a bit further and connects to the Chattooga and Chickamauga Railway. And those are the 2 lines we use on our longer excursions, including the Dinner on the Diner, the Chickamauga Turn, and the Somerville Steam Special. Altogether, those lines do extend a further 52 miles south to a point just south of Somerville, Georgia. To the left, you'll see a large brick building. That is our warehouse, where many of the artifacts that are not currently on display are stored in climate-controlled conditions to ensure their preservation. Also to the left is a blue-colored car. That car is one of our operational dining cars that we do use on our longer trips, including the Dinner on the Diner. We just started those back up for the year just yesterday, so that car is going to be going back into service now. Off in the distance to the left is a large tin building that says Tennessee Valley Road Soul Shops on the front. That building is our back shop where all of our repairs, maintenance, and restorations do take place. Just next to us in the same direction is a large pile of coal, of course, which is the fuel source for the locomotive pulling us today. Now in front of that back shop, you'll see a few diesel locomotives parked outside. With our current operating schedule of Thursday through Sunday, we do operate diesel locomotives to pull this train on the weekdays and steam locomotive on the weekend. So by coming on a Saturday, you do get the experience of riding behind an authentic coal-fired steam locomotive. Next to those diesel locomotives is a large crane. That is what we use to fuel the locomotive with in the morning. It is a clamshell crane. We will pick up scoops of coal using the scoop there on the end and drop it into the tender of the locomotive. It is like a giant claw machine with no prize at the end. was constructed in 1916 by the American Bridge Company and was used by the Central of Georgia Railroad in Macon, Georgia. This table is 80 feet long and it weighs in at 80 tons. Keep in mind the average school bus only weighs in at 6 or 7 tons. That locomotive there weighs in at a total of 215 tons, so when it is on the table, the overall weight between the two is going to be sitting just under 300 tons. So it may surprise you to know that this table was originally turned by hand. It was an Armstrong table. There would have been poles extending out the ends of the table, and it would have taken 4 people to push those poles to spin the table around. Do we have any volunteers? We're going to need 4. We got 2, 3, and 4. Come on over. No, I'm just kidding. We don't do it that way anymore. Now today we just use a small 25 horsepower motor under the operator shed here that our flagman Andrew will be operating. Now our locomotive today is the Southern Railway 4501, built in 1911 by the Baldwin Locomotive Works in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It was built for the Southern Railway as a mainline freight locomotive. Now the Southern Railway retired it in 1948. At that time, it was sold to the Kentucky and Tennessee Railway in Stearns, Kentucky, where it was used to haul coal down from the mines. It was again retired by that railroad and then sold to one of our co-founders here at the museum, Paul Merriman, for $5,000 in his own cash. And then in the early 1960s, he brought it to Chattanooga under its own power. And the locomotive has been here, operating on and off on the museum site and on mainline excursions ever since. Now this locomotive is a 282 Mikado. And what that means is it has 2 small driving wheels, or 2 small pilot wheels in the front, 8 large grab wheels in the middle, and a set of 2 trailing wheels under the cab and firebox. This first 282 ever purchased by the Southern Railway hundreds they would eventually purchase, and ironically enough, it is the only Southern Railway 282 that survives today. This locomotive operates at 205 psi. It has 63-inch diameter driving wheels and produces 53,900 pounds of active effort. Now, as you can see, the wheelbase of this locomotive does fit on the turntable, but the locomotive itself is longer than the turntable, extending off both ends by just a few feet. So if you're at that yellow line, I do need you to take an extra step or 2 back so the front coupler does not come and give you a slap on the way around. Now, if you look up at the cab there, you'll see our engineer, Brian. He's responsible for operating this locomotive and getting us here safely today. So everyone go ahead and give him a wave. There's just another minute or 2 before he gets turning. The toggle switches in the cabinet, and somebody wants the cabinet, so somebody's got to run over to the shop and get the key. So until then, I'll go ahead and tell you how this locomotive operates. So the way this locomotive works is up in the cab there, our fireman Joseph is feeding coal into the firebox where it is burning, about 3 to 6 tons of it a day. Now on the front side of this firebox, there is a series of tubes that run the entire length of the boiler. Those are called the flues. The hot gas from the fire will travel through those flues and then up and out that stack. Now surrounding the flues in the firebox is water. That was loud. Now the water is heated by those hot gases and converts, of course, to steam. And steam does expand. It raises the boiler pressure, in this case, up to 205 psi. When Brian opens that throttle, that steam is channeled down into these large cylinders you see on the front of the locomotive. Inside this cylinder is a large piston the steam is pushing on either side of. And this piston is in turn connected to these rods, and the rods, of course, are connected to the driving wheels. So as the piston is being moved in and out, it is rotating these rods, therefore turning the driving wheels and propelling the locomotive. Now, after that steam has been exhausted from the cylinders, it mixes with the hot gases in the smoke box at the front of the locomotive, the gray portion at the front of the boiler, and it then shoots up and out the stack. Now, that exhausting steam actually creates a vacuum inside that smoke box, and that vacuum in turn is what actually creates the chuffing sound you hear when you see a steam locomotive. Now, as the hot gases and steam are escaping out the stack, that actually, when it creates that vacuum, it causes a draft to pull through the bed of the fire in the firebox, and it actually makes it burn hotter. So the faster this locomotive goes, the hotter the fire gets actually, and the more steam it produces. So the faster it goes, the more power it has. Now earlier when I said this locomotive is a 282 Mikado, what that means, of course, I mentioned earlier, is the two pilot wheels, 8 driving wheels, 2 trailing wheels. Well, the term Mikado is actually a Japanese word meaning emperor, and the reason these were called Mikados is because the first ever locomotive built with this wheel arrangement was sold to one of the state railways in Japan. Now, this locomotive is commonly credited with being the steam locomotive that started the steam preservation movement. Had this locomotive not been saved, there would not have been the drive at that point to start saving other locomotives and really started that movement. So had this one not been saved, many of the others that we still have around with us today would not exist. Cleaning the water out of the air reservoir there. Everyone, this is our fireman Joseph. He's responsible for feeding that fire and as well as maintaining the water level in the boiler, and in turn creating all the steam this engine operates on. Without him, this locomotive would not be going anywhere, so we want to give him a wave as well. A round of applause, either way. Now, most of you have probably seen this locomotive before and don't even realize it. This locomotive has been used in many Hollywood films and music videos. For example, it's been used in many of Johnny Cash's music videos that involve railroading. It was also in a documentary featuring Johnny Cash that he did. It was called Riding the Rails. In the intro to that documentary, he was actually at the throttle of this locomotive running it for the intro. And that was not fake. He actually ran this locomotive himself. Of course, it's been used in many films and television shows as well. For example, I believe one of the first is called Full Trade, starring, was either James Stewart or Jimmy Stewart. I can't ever get that right. It's one of the two. The most famous film it was in was a 1999 film many of you have probably seen called October Sky, starring Jake Gyllenhaal. For those of you that have seen that film, you may recall a scene in which the kids are going to rip up some tracks to get some scrap out of it, the scrap money to fund their rocket project. And then a train comes along and they begin to panic. Well, the locomotive you see in that scene was the 4501 here. It's repainted for the film as a Norfolk and Western engine instead of a Southern locomotive. Of course, as the locomotive comes around, you'll be able to see a plaque here on the side of the pilot, right where I'm pointing at here. This plaque is actually the plaque stating that this locomotive is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Even though we don't try to turn this table by hand nowadays, there are times where this table does not like to operate for mechanical issues, and we do actually have to get out and push it by hand. In fact, we had to do that just 2 weekends ago. Now, the line of sight wasn't the correct track today. We still use the original method, and that would be the antique method of eyesight. Of course, these turntables back in the day were not always used at the end of the line like this. Most commonly, they would be in front of what was called a roundhouse. A building built around the turntable, and it would have stalls where the locomotives could go in and receive maintenance. As you can see, our locomotive is, our train is currently sitting on track 1, and we've on the locomotive up of track 2. That is so what we can do what is called a runaround. We're going to run the locomotive past the train beyond the switch. That switch will then be thrown, and the locomotive will then reverse into the train so it can pull us back in the opposite direction. Now that we've completed turning the locomotive around, we can go ahead and start making our way back to the train for the return to the Grand Junction. Please remember just to return at the same seat and car you rode in on the way over. Don't forget there are restrooms available in the depot. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to come and ask me those questions. I do love questions, so please don't hesitate.
He said, let's just switch to the front and then see forward on it.
Welcome back aboard.
That's what I was trying to do.
Now that back shop I pointed out earlier, I would like to point out that the back shop is normally included as a part of the tour we give, but at this time we're not allowed to do that per rules of the Hamilton County Health Department, as there's not enough space in there to spread everyone apart, so I'm going to tell you about it on board instead. Well, like I mentioned earlier, the back shop is where we do all of our repairs, maintenance, and restoration on all of our equipment, and all railroads have had a back shop just like that back in the day, but on a much larger scale. Now, the reason they were called back shops is because, well, they were in the back of the property, hence the name. Now, that back shop is equipped with a number of features that allows us to work on our equipment, such as the 4-foot deep drop pit, the 10-ton overhead crane, the machine shop, and most importantly, the wheel shop in the back, which has a 90-inch diameter steam locomotive driving wheel lathe. In fact, it's one of the only ones left in existence. It is so rare that we often get in shipments of steam locomotive driving wheels from across the nation and do work for other railroads. Now, in terms of the restorations, back then a steam locomotive could have been rebuilt in about 1 month. But for us, for example, with our other operating steam locomotive, the Southern Railway 630, it took us 10 years.
Okay.
So 10 years compared to 1 month. Well, why is that? Well, they had 3 things back then that we don't have today. And those are the parts, the amount of skilled labor, and the money. If a part breaks on a locomotive, we can't just go to a hardware store and get a new part. Believe me, I had tried. AutoZone does not have them. So what we have to do is machine a new part from scratch right in the back shop. Next is the amount of skilled labor. In those back shops back in the day, there would have been about 100 to 150 people working on a single locomotive at a time, doing all kinds of various tasks in an assembly line-like fashion. But today, that is a very rare, specialized, and sought after skill. On average, we'll have just 1 or 2 people at a time working on that equipment. And then last, of course, is the money. So, on average today, steam locomotives do cost a little over $1 million a piece to restore to operation, and we're a non-profit educational organization. So where do we get that kind of money? Well, one is our ticket sales, of course. A portion of every ticket sold goes towards the restoration fund. Next is our freight service. We do handle a small amount of freight in the Chattanooga area. And then last, of course, is donations. Now, the reason we do all this work here is because of history. In fact, one of our main missions here is to educate the public on the history and the importance of the American railroads. And to put that into perspective, keep in mind if it wasn't for the railroads, our nation most likely would not exist. When the trains first started to appear, that's when this nation really did start to evolve and expand. It was the railroads, in fact, that it did eventually help us expand westward and connect the coast. It was just last year, actually, that we celebrated the 150th anniversary of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, May 10th, 1869. They dropped that travel time down from a matter of months to just a few days once that railroad was completed. Now, of course, the trains were also very important for the war efforts. Civil War, World War I, World War II. If it wasn't for these trains transporting troops and supplies for the war efforts, we could have easily lost any one of those wars. And even just for travel back then as well. Before the airlines in the United States existed, and to travel long relax, enjoy the rest of the ride back to Grand Junction. I will be roaming the train, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to stop me. I'll be happy to answer questions for you. I do my best to answer them, and if I don't have an answer for you, I will make something up that sounds good. We did one. This line is just the one in the 3 that I think way down the line. That was a metal recycling box part that you can go there often. And we'll pull it out for whichever locomotive we're using today. So if it shows up on a weekend, we'll break the seam. We do. And of course, there's the East Chattanooga Belt Line, which is the one that's close to downtown. to thank everyone for riding with us today at the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum and hope you did enjoy your excursion. If you choose to visit with us again in the future, of course, we have many other trips you can choose from, many longer trips, such as the Dinner on the Diner, the Chickamauga Turn, the Summer Bowl Steam Special, as well as our holiday-themed trips, such as the Halloween Erie Express and the North Pole Limited, the annual Day Out with Thomas, and our Hawaii trips out of Etowah, Tennessee. Now, we do thank everyone for their patience and understanding today as we implement these health department guidelines to ensure everyone's safety on board the train. If you have not had a chance to check out the display yard out by the parking lot, feel free to go and do so after you exit the train. There's lots of equipment out there on display. If you wish to go back into the station to visit the gift shop or the deli, we do just have to ask that you go around to the front side of the building and enter through the front door, as our designated entrance and exit doors at this time. Once the train is stopped, we'll be unloading the train again by car color, so please do remain seated until your car color is called. And of course, the locomotive will be turning around for our next trip, and we'll be doing so using the section of track called the Y, so W-Y-E. It is those two sections of track in front of Grand Junction Station here. It is going to be doing basically a 3-point turn. So if you'd like to view that, once you exit the train, walk out front of the station, and it is a great opportunity for some photos and videos of the locomotive. In fact, once we get it in front of the station, we're going to park the locomotive for about 5 minutes next to the pedestrian crossing if anyone wants to get a photo or video with the locomotive, if you want to take a selfie with the locomotive or anything. Also, if you'd like to learn a bit more history about the locomotive that pulled your train today, there is a feature-length documentary available in the gift shop called And Then There Was One. It is a full hour-and-a-half movie about the entire history of the 4501. Now, they don't want me to tell you this, but you can actually watch it for free on YouTube as well. So the title of that is And Then There Was One. Now, please make sure you don't forget any personal items for departing today, such as hats, glasses, keys, wallets, purses, cell phones, husbands, wives, and kids. Now, if you did enjoy your trip today, my name is Zach with an H. If you did not enjoy it, in that case, my name is Zach with a K.
After we disembarked the train, we headed to the lower part of the Y by the pedestrian crossing and caught this awesome shot with one of our GoPros. 4501 stopped just before the pedestrian crossing for a photo opportunity. After about 10 or 15 minutes, 4501 was on the move again. As she rolled on past, she was given orders on the fly. We're set up by the first car once again as 4501 couples up to her train. We're on the bench right next to where the locomotive usually stops, as 4501 prepares for her next trip to East Chattanooga. After 4501 had left, we caught two Norfolk Southern trains pass by Grand Junction. After both trains had passed, 4501 once again pulls into Grand Junction. After the train pulled back in, we decided to grab some lunch at the Grand Junction Depot. We didn't catch the 4501 running the Y, but we did catch her leaving on another trip to East Chattanooga. We set up at the railroad crossing for the parking lot as 4501 backs her way up the Y to head back to the train. The 4501 departs Grand Junction one more time with a trainload of people. "4501 returns to Grand Junction after another successful trip to East Chattanooga. Unfortunately, that was the last train of the day, and 4501 shoved the train back to East Chattanooga. Thanks for watching. I hope you liked what you saw. If you did, please like, comment, and subscribe. And ring the notification bell to be notified about my future uploads.